Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow, the architect of Turkmenistan's authoritarian dynasty. Part 1. Early life and family background. Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow was born on June 29, 1957, in the rural village of Babarap, located in Göktepe district, Ahal province, Turkmenistan. At the time of his birth, Turkmenistan was still a constituent republic of the Soviet Union, USSR, governed by the centralized authority of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, CPSU. The region where he was born, Ahal province, has long been considered the heartland of Turkmen culture and identity, a stronghold of the Turkmen Tek tribe, which has historically played an influential role in the nation's affairs. From an early age, the future leader grew up surrounded by both the Soviet ideological framework and the deep-rooted traditions of Turkmen society, two forces that would shape his future political trajectory. A family of military and law enforcement tradition, Berdimuhamedow was born into a large family, being the only son among 6 children. His father, Malakguli Berdimuhamedow, 1932-2021, was a career law enforcement officer who served as a senior officer in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, specifically as part of a prison guard detachment. Over the course of his career, he rose through the ranks and eventually retired with the distinguished rank of Colonel of Police. His work in law enforcement gave him a deep understanding of state security, discipline, and control, values that he sought to instill in his son from a young age. Growing up with a father who dedicated his life to maintaining order and ensuring state authority meant that young Gurbanguly was raised in an environment that placed a high emphasis on hierarchical respect, duty, and loyalty to the state apparatus. Beyond his father, another major influence in his upbringing was his grandfather, Berdimuhamed Anayu. Anayu was not only a teacher, but also a soldier who served in the Red Army during World War II, taking part in some of the most crucial battles of the Eastern Front. He was a soldier in the 748th Rifle Regiment of the 206th Rifle Division, which was attached to the 2nd Ukrainian Front, a major military formation that played a decisive role in repelling the Nazi invasion. One of the most significant military engagements in which his grandfather participated was the Battle of the Dnieper, a massive Soviet offensive in September 1943, during which his unit was one of the first to cross the Dnieper River, a strategic operation that ultimately contributed to the liberation of Ukraine from German occupation. Despite surviving the horrors of World War II, Berdimuhamed Aniyu's life was tragically cut short by one of Turkmenistan's worst natural disasters. In 1948, the Ashgabat earthquake struck the capital of Turkmenistan, completely devastating the city and causing an estimated 110,000 deaths. Among the countless lives lost was Berdimuhamedow's grandfather, a loss that had a profound effect on the family. This event was deeply etched into the young boy's memory, reinforcing themes of resilience, survival, and national unity, ideas that would later become central to his political philosophy. The earthquake was also used in state propaganda under Berdimuhamedow's leadership, with his family's personal loss being emphasized as part of his nationalist credentials. Growing up under Soviet rule, education and upbringing, the Turkmen Soviet Socialist Republic, where Berdimuhamedow was born and raised, was governed directly from Moscow, and all aspects of life were heavily controlled by the Communist Party. Education, politics, and even cultural identity were regulated according to Soviet ideological principles. From an early age, young Gurbanguly was immersed in a strict Soviet schooling system, which emphasized science, mathematics, political ideology, and loyalty to the Communist Party. Turkmenistan in the 1950s and 1960s was still largely rural and underdeveloped compared to the more industrialized regions of the Soviet Union. The Turkmen economy was heavily dependent on agriculture, cotton production, and state-run industries, with very little room for private enterprise. Soviet authorities, however, invested in education and healthcare, which provided young students like Berdimuhamedow with opportunities for upward mobility. Hard work and academic excellence were often rewarded with positions in state institutions, and ambitious individuals who excelled in their studies could secure spots at prestigious universities. As a child, Berdimuhamedow was described by former classmates and teachers as serious, disciplined, and highly ambitious. Unlike many other children who engaged in outdoor activities or sports, he was known for his reserved and studious nature, spending long hours reading textbooks and preparing for exams. His natural affinity for science and medicine led him to excel in subjects such as biology and chemistry, which would later shape his decision to pursue a career in dentistry and public health. Berdimuhamedow's family background in law enforcement and military service also played a major role in shaping his worldview and career choices. In the rigid structure of Soviet society, having a father in law enforcement provided certain advantages, particularly in terms of discipline, access to education, and career opportunities. Many children of military and police officials often followed in their parents' footsteps, pursuing careers in government service, security, and administration. However, young Gurbanguly decided to take a different path, choosing medicine as his initial profession, an unusual choice for someone from his background. A path to higher education. By the time he reached his teenage years, Berdimuhamedow had already set his sights on higher education, which was considered one of the few paths toward personal advancement in the Soviet meritocratic system. His academic performance and discipline made him a strong candidate for university admission, and upon completing his early schooling, he enrolled in the prestigious Turkmen State Medical Institute in 1975. His decision to pursue a career in dentistry was shaped by both personal interest and practical considerations. The field of medicine was highly respected in Soviet society, and dentistry, in particular, was a profession that provided stability and financial security. While other branches of medicine required extensive years of study and specialization, dentistry offered a more direct route to professional practice, making it an attractive option for ambitious students. While attending medical school, Berdimuhamedow quickly distinguished himself among his peers. He was known for his meticulous attention to detail, strong work ethic, and ability to memorize complex medical concepts with ease. His instructors regarded him as a diligent and highly focused student, qualities that would later serve him well in both medicine and politics. His years at the Turkmen State Medical Institute coincided with the period of Soviet stagnation under Leonid Brezhnev, a time when economic and political reforms were slow-moving, but the state continued to heavily control all aspects of life. However, for students of medicine and science, this era still provided opportunities for advancement, as the Soviet government maintained significant investments in healthcare, medical research, and technical education. By the late 1970s, Berdimuhamedow had successfully completed his medical training and was ready to enter the workforce as a fully trained dentist. At the time, dentistry in Turkmenistan was a growing field, with the government actively expanding healthcare services across the republic. His initial years in medical practice provided him with valuable experience in public service, allowing him to interact with patients and understand the healthcare challenges faced by ordinary Turkmen citizens. Berdimuhamedow's early life was shaped by a combination of strict discipline, Soviet education, and nationalistic influences from his family's military and law enforcement background. His upbringing in a structured and hierarchical environment prepared him for the rigorous demands of both the medical profession and later politics. Part 2. Education, medical career, and entry into public service. By the time Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow completed his early schooling in the 1970s, he had already distinguished himself as a highly disciplined and academically gifted student. The Soviet education system, which emphasized scientific rigor, political ideology, and vocational training, provided him with the foundation to pursue a career in medicine. Unlike many young men from law enforcement or military backgrounds who sought careers in security, politics, or engineering, Berdimuhamedow took a different route, one that would set him on an unexpected path toward national leadership decades later. Higher education at Turkmen State Medical Institute. In 1975, at the age of 18, Berdimuhamedow enrolled at the Turkmen State Medical Institute, one of the most prestigious higher education institutions in the Turkmen Soviet Socialist Republic. Located in Ashgabat, the capital of Turkmenistan, the Medical Institute was part of the Soviet Union's extensive system of state-run universities, designed to produce well-trained professionals to serve the needs of the socialist state. At the time, medical education in the Soviet Union was highly standardized and rigorous. Students were required to complete intensive coursework in anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, pathology, and clinical sciences, alongside political education that reinforced the principles of Marxism-Leninism. Unlike in many Western countries, Soviet medical training was highly structured, with an emphasis on practical experience, public health administration, and state-mandated medical service. Young doctors were expected to contribute to the country's state-controlled healthcare system, which was one of the pillars of Soviet governance. As a student, Berdimuhamedow excelled in scientific subjects, showing a particular aptitude for dentistry, which had been gaining prominence as an important field of medicine in the Soviet Union. Unlike more general medical practitioners, dentists were trained to address oral health issues, perform surgeries, and provide preventive care, making them an essential part of the public health infrastructure. Berdimuhamedow's choice to specialize in dentistry was likely influenced by both practical considerations and personal interest. Dentistry was a field that provided a stable career path, relatively high social status, and opportunities for advancement within the Soviet healthcare bureaucracy. Furthermore, dental professionals were in high demand, particularly in rural areas of the Turkmen SSR, where access to specialized medical care was often limited. During his university years, he was described as a serious and methodical student, known for his meticulous approach to his studies. While some of his peers were drawn to political activism or social life, Berdimuhamedow remained focused on his academic goals, demonstrating the discipline and ambition that would later define his leadership style. Graduation and early medical career. In 1979, at the age of 22, Berdimuhamedow graduated from the Turkmen State Medical Institute, earning his degree in dentistry. This marked the beginning of his career in the Soviet healthcare system, where he would gain practical experience, administrative skills, and connections that would later prove instrumental in his rise to power. Following Soviet policy at the time, newly trained medical professionals were often assigned to work in designated locations, usually in areas where their skills were most needed. Many doctors and dentists were sent to rural regions or underdeveloped areas where healthcare infrastructure was limited. It is believed that Berdimuhamedow spent his early years practicing dentistry in government-run medical facilities, providing dental care to patients in the state-controlled healthcare system. Dentistry in the Soviet Union was not just about clinical practice. It was also a field that intersected with public health administration and state planning. The government sought to modernize dental care, expand access to services, and implement preventive measures, such as public education campaigns on oral hygiene. As a trained dentist, Berdimuhamedow was not only responsible for treating patients, but also for ensuring that state-mandated health initiatives were carried out effectively. His work as a public health professional exposed him to the bureaucratic mechanisms of the Soviet healthcare system, which would later play a key role in shaping his political and administrative career. Unlike many other dentists who remained in clinical practice, Berdimuhamedow showed a keen interest in healthcare policy, institutional management, and government-led medical programs. This interest in the organizational and administrative side of medicine would later propel him into positions of greater responsibility. Advanced studies and specialization. By the mid-1980s, Berdimuhamedow's ambitions extended beyond simply being a practicing dentist. In addition to his work in the state-run healthcare system, he pursued further specialization in medical sciences. It is reported that he earned a PhD in medical sciences from an institution in Moscow, further deepening his knowledge of healthcare administration, research, and clinical practice. During this period, the Soviet Union was undergoing significant changes under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev, who introduced perestroika, economic restructuring, and glasnost, political openness, in an attempt to revitalize the Soviet system. These reforms created new opportunities for ambitious professionals, particularly in the field of public administration and institutional management. Berdimuhamedow's additional academic credentials made him an attractive candidate for leadership roles within Turkmenistan's healthcare bureaucracy. Unlike many of his colleagues who remained solely focused on their medical careers, he began to transition into administrative roles, taking on responsibilities that extended beyond clinical work. By 1992, after more than a decade of working in dentistry and public health, Berdimuhamedow was appointed to the dentistry faculty at the Turkmen State Medical Institute, where he became a professor and an administrator. This position not only reinforced his expertise in medical sciences, but also brought him closer to government structures and influential figures in the healthcare system. Entry into government under Saparmurat Niyazov. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked a turning point for Turkmenistan, which declared independence and established itself as a sovereign nation under the leadership of Saparmurat Niyazov. Niyazov, also known as Turkmenbashi, father of the Turkmen, quickly consolidated absolute power, creating a highly authoritarian political system with a personality cult centered around himself. In the aftermath of independence, Turkmenistan needed qualified professionals to help build new state institutions, restructure government ministries, and manage public services. Berdimuhamedow, with his background in medicine and administration, was seen as a promising candidate for a government position. In 1995, during the early years of Niyazov's rule, Berdimuhamedow was appointed head of the Dentistry Center within the Ministry of Health and Medical Industry. This appointment marked his official entry into Turkmenistan's government, placing him in a position of influence within the country's public health sector. 2 years later, in 1997, he was promoted to the position of Minister of Health, making him one of the highest-ranking officials in Niyazov's administration. As Minister of Health, he was responsible for overseeing the country's medical system, implementing state health policies, and managing healthcare reforms. This role would serve as a stepping stone to even greater political power, eventually leading to his rise as Turkmenistan's leader. Berdimuhamedow's early career in dentistry and public health provided him with the technical expertise and administrative experience that would later define his governing style. His transition from a medical professional to a government minister set the stage for his meteoric rise under Niyazov's regime. Part 3. The Rise of a Politician, from Minister of Health to Deputy Prime Minister. By the mid-1990s, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow had firmly established himself as an influential figure within Turkmenistan's medical and academic sectors. His career trajectory had transitioned from clinical dentistry to medical administration, and ultimately to government service. However, it was during his tenure as Minister of Health under President Saparmurat Niyazov that he gained prominence on the national stage. Berdimuhamedow's rise within the post-Soviet Turkmen government was not merely the result of his technical expertise in medicine, but also due to his ability to navigate the rigid and authoritarian political structures of the country. His loyalty, adaptability, and administrative competence made him a trusted official in an era when Niyazov was consolidating his power into a one-man dictatorship. Minister of Health, a role in a highly centralized government. In 1997, at the age of 40, Berdimuhamedow was appointed as Turkmenistan's Minister of Health and Medical Industry by President Saparmurat Niyazov. This promotion was a significant milestone, as it placed him in charge of one of the most crucial government ministries responsible for public welfare. However, serving in this capacity also meant operating under the direct control of Niyazov, who micromanaged all aspects of governance and demanded absolute obedience from his ministers. At the time of his appointment, Turkmenistan's healthcare system was in decline, suffering from a lack of funding, infrastructure, and qualified medical personnel. Despite the country's vast natural gas reserves, much of its wealth was redirected toward Niyazov's vanity projects, including the construction of golden statues, lavish palaces, and extravagant state monuments. As a result, public services such as healthcare, education, and social welfare received minimal investment. One of Berdimuhamedow's key responsibilities as Minister of Health was to implement Niyazov's controversial healthcare policies, which often had disastrous consequences for the well-being of Turkmen citizens. Among the most infamous policies carried out under his watch was the closure of hospitals outside of Ashgabat and other major cities in 2005. Following Niyazov's decree, medical facilities in rural areas were shut down, forcing citizens to travel long distances to access basic healthcare services. This decision devastated the country's healthcare system, leaving thousands without proper medical treatment, emergency services, or preventive care. Additionally, in April 2004, Niyazov suspended Berdimuhamedow's salary for 3 months due to widespread issues of unpaid wages for healthcare workers. This incident reflected both the chaotic nature of governance under Niyazov and the constant pressure that ministers faced to maintain their positions. However, despite these challenges, Berdimuhamedow remained loyal and continued to serve in his role, avoiding the fate of many other government officials who had fallen out of favor and been imprisoned or exiled. Appointment as Deputy Prime Minister. Berdimuhamedow's loyalty and ability to survive political purges earned him an even more powerful position in 2001 when he was appointed Deputy Prime Minister of Turkmenistan. In most countries, this position would be seen as one step below the head of government, but in Turkmenistan's political system, it was more symbolic than independent, as the government functioned entirely under the will of Niyazov. However, despite his limited authority, this appointment marked Berdimuhamedow's entry into the highest levels of power. As Deputy Prime Minister, he was assigned to oversee multiple sectors, including health, science, education, and sports. This placed him in charge of several key areas of public administration, allowing him to expand his influence across multiple government institutions. While Niyazov remained the sole authority on major political decisions, Berdimuhamedow's increasing visibility suggested that he was becoming a trusted figure within the regime. His ability to manage bureaucratic affairs efficiently set him apart from many other officials, and his technocratic background made him seem more competent than the corrupt and inefficient administrators who populated Niyazov's government. Unlike many of his contemporaries who had backgrounds in party politics or security services, Berdimuhamedow's rise was due to his medical expertise, administrative skills, and reputation as a problem solver. Surviving the political climate of Niyazov's regime, the early 2000s were a dangerous period for government officials in Turkmenistan. Niyazov ruled with an iron fist, eliminating anyone he saw as a potential rival or threat to his absolute control. His cult of personality had reached extreme levels, with statues and portraits of the self-proclaimed Turkmen Bashi, father of all Turkmen, covering the entire country. Ministers and high-ranking officials were frequently dismissed, arrested, or exiled on charges of corruption, disloyalty, or conspiracy, often without evidence. Some were even subjected to public humiliation on state television, where they were forced to confess to fabricated crimes before being sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Berdimuhamedow, however, managed to survive this volatile political landscape by maintaining a low profile, demonstrating unwavering loyalty to Niyazov, and avoiding direct involvement in political struggles. His background as a doctor and administrator may have helped him avoid the fate of more politically ambitious figures who sought greater power within the government. His strategy of survival during this period was characterized by absolute loyalty to Niyazov. He never openly challenged or contradicted the president's decisions, even when they were harmful to the country. Staying outside political factions. He did not associate himself too closely with any particular group within the government, allowing him to remain neutral. Focusing on administrative efficiency, unlike many other officials who were involved in corruption and political games, he cultivated an image of a competent technocrat. Avoiding public controversy. He rarely made statements or took actions that would attract negative attention from Niyazov. This cautious and pragmatic approach allowed him to rise steadily within the government, even as many others fell. By the time of Niyazov's death in December 2006, Berdimuhamedow had positioned himself as one of the most senior and experienced officials within the administration, making him a natural candidate to assume leadership during the sudden power vacuum. From a medical professional to Minister of Health and ultimately Deputy Prime Minister, Berdimuhamedow had maneuvered through the complex and dangerous political environment of Turkmenistan under Niyazov. His ability to navigate the authoritarian system without challenging its leadership enabled him to remain a trusted figure within the government. Part 4. Seizing Power. From Acting President to Elected Leader. On December 21, 2006, Turkmenistan was thrown into political uncertainty following the sudden death of Saparmurat Niyazov, the country's first and only leader since independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. Niyazov had ruled with absolute authority for over 15 years, cultivating a cult of personality that made him appear irreplaceable. His unexpected passing created an immediate power vacuum, and for the first time since independence, Turkmenistan faced a leadership transition with no clear successor. Despite being only one of several deputy prime ministers, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow emerged as the key figure in the post-Niyazov power struggle, maneuvering his way into the presidency in a matter of weeks. The power vacuum and Berdimuhamedow's appointment as acting president. Under Turkmenistan's 1992 constitution, the chairman of the Assembly of Turkmenistan, the lower house of parliament, was supposed to assume the role of acting president in the event of the president's death. In 2006, that position was held by Ozgeldi Atayu, a senior government official who had served under Niyazov. However, within hours of Niyazov's death, the State Security Council of Turkmenistan, the country's most powerful political body, announced that Atayu was under criminal investigation and was therefore ineligible to assume the presidency. This sudden and unexpected legal action against Atayu effectively removed him from the line of succession, clearing the way for an alternative candidate to take over. That candidate was Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow. Despite constitutional rules stating that an acting president could not run in the next election, Turkmenistan's ruling elite, led by the State Security Council, intelligence agencies, and military leaders, quickly amended the constitution to remove this restriction. As a result, Berdimuhamedow was not only appointed acting president on December 21, 2006, but also became the frontrunner in the upcoming presidential election. Consolidating power. The 2007 presidential election. With his position firmly secured as acting president, Berdimuhamedow wasted no time in consolidating power and eliminating any potential rivals. Despite official claims that the upcoming presidential election would be democratic, the reality was that no real opposition was allowed to participate. On December 26, 2006, a session of the People's Council of Turkmenistan, the country's highest legislative body at the time, formally nominated 6 candidates for the election, all of whom were members of the Democratic Party of Turkmenistan, the only legal political party in the country. Among the 6, Berdimuhamedow was the clear favorite, as he was already the de facto head of state and had the backing of key power structures, including the military, security services, and the ruling elite. The presidential election took place on February 11, 2007. The results were unsurprising. Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow won with 89% of the vote, an overwhelming margin that confirmed his total control over the political system. His 5 competitors who were handpicked to run against him received only token levels of support, ensuring that the election had the appearance of competition without any real threat to his victory. International observers, including human rights organizations, dismissed the election as a sham, pointing out that it was neither free nor fair and that the outcome had been decided in advance. With his formal election victory, Berdimuhamedow was sworn in as the second president of Turkmenistan on February 14, 2007, marking the official beginning of his long tenure as the country's leader. Breaking with Niyazov's policies or maintaining the status quo? As Berdimuhamedow took office, there was speculation about whether he would continue Niyazov's authoritarian rule or introduce reforms to modernize the country. During his inauguration speech, he promised moderate reforms, particularly in healthcare, education, and technology, areas that had suffered significant setbacks under Niyazov. Some of the early policy changes he introduced included restoring pensions for the elderly, Under Niyazov, 100,000 elderly citizens had their pensions eliminated, leading to widespread hardship. One of Berdimuhamedow's first acts as president was to reinstate these payments, earning him some public goodwill. Expanding internet access. Under Niyazov, access to the internet was heavily restricted, with only select government officials allowed to use it. Berdimuhamedow opened internet cafes in Ashgabat, making online access more widely available, though still highly censored. Reforming the education system. Niyazov had reduced compulsory education from 10 years to 9 and closed many educational institutions. Berdimuhamedow reversed these policies, restoring the 10-year school system and reintroducing subjects that had been eliminated, such as history, arts, and sports. However, despite these superficial changes, the core structure of the regime remained authoritarian. Although he distanced himself from some of Niyazov's more eccentric policies, he maintained tight control over the country, ensuring that political opposition, press freedom, and civil liberties remained severely restricted. Strengthening his hold on power, following his election in 2007, Berdimuhamedow moved quickly to solidify his rule by purging the old guard. Several high-ranking officials loyal to Niyazov were either fired, arrested, or sidelined, ensuring that potential rivals were removed from positions of influence. Building his own cult of personality. While he initially scaled back some of Niyazov's personality cult, he later began cultivating his own, with state media portraying him as a visionary leader, athlete, poet, and expert in multiple fields. Centralizing power. He strengthened the role of the presidency, ensuring that all major political and economic decisions were made directly by him, continuing the authoritarian legacy of his predecessor. By 2008, it was clear that Berdimuhamedow had successfully transitioned from an interim leader to a long-term ruler, and he had no intention of stepping down. His political consolidation set the stage for his unchallenged control over Turkmenistan for the next decade and beyond. Berdimuhamedow's rise to power was marked by strategic maneuvering, constitutional manipulation, and an election with no real opposition. While he initially presented himself as a reformer, his authoritarian grip on the country remained strong, ensuring that Turkmenistan continued as one of the most closed and repressive states in the world. Part 5. The Making of an Absolute Ruler, Cult of Personality and Consolidation of Power, 2007-2012. After securing his first full term as president in 2007, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow embarked on a mission to strengthen his grip on power, while simultaneously presenting himself as a reformer to both the Turkmen people and the international community. Though he initially distanced himself from the excesses of his predecessor, Saparmurat Niyazov, it soon became evident that he had no intention of liberalizing Turkmenistan's rigid political system. Instead, he worked to eliminate potential rivals, consolidate authority, and build his own cult of personality, ensuring that power remained firmly in his hands. Early domestic policies, cosmetic reforms, and symbolic changes. During his first years in office, Berdimuhamedow focused on superficial reforms that appeared to reverse some of Niyazov's most extreme policies. But these measures ultimately left the country's authoritarian structure unchanged. Some of the early policy changes he introduced included 1. Restoring and expanding education. Under Niyazov, the education system had been severely weakened, with compulsory schooling reduced from 10 years to 9, and many schools and universities forced to remove subjects deemed unnecessary by the regime. Niyazov had even banned foreign language studies in some institutions and shortened university programs to just 2 years, leaving graduates unqualified for jobs abroad. Berdimuhamedow reversed these policies, restoring 10 years of mandatory education and extending university programs to 5 years, aligning them more closely with international standards. He reintroduced subjects such as history, literature, and arts, which had been marginalized under Niyazov's rule. Schools began teaching English again, though state control over the curriculum remained tight. While these changes improved the structure of the education system, free thought and independent learning were still strictly forbidden, and state propaganda remained central to the curriculum. 2. Limited technological advancements. One of Berdimuhamedow's more widely publicized reforms was his effort to increase access to the internet. Under Niyazov, internet access had been heavily restricted, available only to government officials and state-run institutions. In 2007, internet cafes were introduced in Ashgabat, allowing limited public access to online information. However, most international websites remained blocked, and surveillance of online activity was extensive. The government tightly controlled social media, preventing independent activism or free discussion. Although internet access had increased, Turkmenistan still ranked among the most censored countries in the world, alongside North Korea and Eritrea. 3. Modest healthcare reforms. As a former Minister of Health, Berdimuhamedow sought to portray himself as a champion of medical progress. He reversed some of Niyazov's disastrous policies, including reopening hospitals that had been shut down in rural areas, restoring pensions for the elderly, which Niyazov had cut, expanding the availability of medical training programs. However, systemic problems such as poor infrastructure, corruption, and shortages of medical supplies continued to plague the healthcare sector, and ordinary citizens still struggled to access quality treatment. 4. Promises of economic modernization. Despite Turkmenistan's vast natural gas reserves, much of the country's wealth remained concentrated in the hands of the ruling elite. In an effort to boost his economic credentials, Berdimuhamedow announced grand infrastructure projects, including the construction of new highways, airports, and luxury hotels. Plans to diversify the economy, though in reality, the economy remained heavily dependent on natural gas exports. Large-scale urban development projects in Ashgabat, giving the capital a modern, polished appearance, while rural areas remained underdeveloped. Despite these projects, corruption flourished, with government contracts awarded to companies linked to Berdimuhamedow's inner circle. The birth of a new cult of personality. Although Berdimuhamedow initially distanced himself from Niyazov's extreme personality cult, it did not take long before he began constructing his own. By 2009, state propaganda had shifted from praising Niyazov to glorifying Berdimuhamedow, positioning him as the new father of the nation. He adopted the title Arkadag, meaning protector, which became a central part of his public image. His portraits and statues started appearing in every government building, school, and public square. He wrote books on medicine, history, and Turkmen culture, which were compulsory reading in schools and universities. State-controlled media constantly praised his wisdom, leadership, and supposed expertise in multiple fields, portraying him as a scholar, sportsman, and artist. By 2010, the transformation was complete. Turkmenistan had traded one dictator's cult of personality for another, strengthening political control, a one-man rule. While Berdimuhamedow's early years in office were marked by promises of reform, he quickly tightened his grip on power and ensured that his rule would remain unchallenged. 1. Eliminating political opposition. All political parties other than the Democratic Party of Turkmenistan remained banned. Critics and opposition figures were imprisoned, exiled, or disappeared. Media remained state-controlled, and independent journalism was non-existent. 2. Control over elections. In 2012, Berdimuhamedow ran for re-election in another heavily rigged election. He won with 97% of the vote, an even higher margin than his 2007 election victory. Voter turnout was reported as 96%, but international observers dismissed the election as a meaningless formality. 3. Expanding his authority. In 2010, Turkmenistan's parliament passed constitutional changes that further centralized power in the hands of the president. The presidency became even more dominant, with Berdimuhamedow personally overseeing every major decision in government. He ensured that loyal officials occupied all key positions, making it impossible for any rival faction to emerge. Symbolic gestures and public spectacle. Throughout his first term, Berdimuhamedow engaged in elaborate public displays designed to reinforce his image as an energetic, multi-talented leader. He frequently appeared on state television, engaging in activities such as racing horses and claiming to be an expert equestrian, singing and playing musical instruments, presenting himself as a gifted artist. practicing martial arts and performing sports demonstrations, participating in military exercises, portraying himself as a fearless commander. These carefully staged events served to distract from the country's growing economic and social problems, while also enhancing his cult of personality. By the end of Berdimuhamedow's first full term, 2007-2012, Turkmenistan had fully transitioned from one dictatorship to another. His cosmetic reforms gave the illusion of progress, but the country remained as authoritarian as ever. His cult of personality flourished, and his grip on power became absolute. Part 6, Cementing His Rule, Absolute Power and Global Ambitions, 2012 to 2017. By the time Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow secured his second term in the 2012 presidential election, his grip on Turkmenistan's political system was absolute. His re-election, officially winning 97% of the vote, was a foregone conclusion, with no genuine opposition candidates permitted to challenge him. While his first term, 2007-2012, had focused on consolidating control and establishing his own cult of personality, his second term was marked by even greater authoritarianism, economic difficulties, and efforts to strengthen Turkmenistan's role on the international stage. The 2012 presidential election, a mere formality. On February 12, 2012, Turkmenistan held its presidential election, a process that had no real democratic legitimacy. The results were unsurprising. Berdimuhamedow secured a landslide victory with 97.4% of the vote, an even higher percentage than his 2007 election win, 89%. 8 candidates were allowed to run, but all were members of pro-government parties who offered no meaningful challenge to the incumbent. International observers, including Human Rights Watch and Freedom House, condemned the election as a political theater with no real competition, independent media, or opposition candidates. With his re-election secured, Berdimuhamedow was now emboldened to rule with even fewer restrictions, further centralizing his power and eliminating any remaining dissent. Strengthening authoritarian rule, a regime with no limits. While Turkmenistan had never been a democracy, the second term of Berdimuhamedow's rule saw the country slide further into one-man dictatorship, with nearly every aspect of political, economic, and social life dominated by the president. 1. Constitutional changes to remove term limits. In 2016, Berdimuhamedow abolished the constitutional provision that limited a president to 2 5-year terms. A new constitution extended the presidential term from 5 to 7 years and removed the maximum age limit for candidates, previously set at 70. This effectively allowed Berdimuhamedow to remain president for life, eliminating even the possibility of a contested election in the future. These changes were rubber-stamped by the Parliament of Turkmenistan, which had long ceased to function as an independent legislative body. 2. Tightening control over society. Berdimuhamedow expanded the state surveillance, particularly targeting political dissidents and critics, many of whom were either jailed, exiled, or disappeared. The internet, which remained heavily censored, with government agents monitoring social media, online communications, and private messaging apps. Religious groups, particularly those who operated outside state-controlled mosques, as Turkmenistan maintained a strict policy of religious regulation. The secret police, Ministry of National Security, played a major role in enforcing loyalty to the regime, conducting constant monitoring of citizens, restricting travel, and silencing opposition voices. 3. The expansion of his cult of personality. While Berdimuhamedow had initially distanced himself from the extreme personality cult of Saparmurat Niyazov, by his second term, he had fully embraced the same tactics of glorification. His public image was now the centerpiece of Turkmenistan's state propaganda, with new symbols, monuments, and media campaigns reinforcing his status as the nation's supreme leader. His official title, Archidog, Protector, became compulsory in state media and government speeches. A golden statue of him riding a horse was unveiled in Ashgabat, much like Niyazov's own golden statues. His books were published on subjects ranging from medicine to horse breeding, music, and governance, all of which were required reading in schools and universities. State television regularly broadcasted footage of him engaging in sports, playing music, and performing military exercises, reinforcing his image as an all-powerful leader with limitless talents. By 2015, the personality cult surrounding Berdimuhamedow had reached full force, rivaling that of his predecessor. Economic challenges and grand infrastructure projects. While Turkmenistan remained rich in natural gas resources, the country faced growing economic problems due to over-reliance on gas exports, particularly to China, which had become the country's main buyer after Russia reduced imports. Lack of economic diversification, leaving Turkmenistan vulnerable to fluctuations in global energy prices. Rampant government corruption, where major infrastructure projects were awarded to companies controlled by Berdimuhamedow's allies. 1. The Tapi Pipeline, a grand but controversial project. One of Berdimuhamedow's most ambitious economic projects was the Tapi Pipeline, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, aimed at exporting Turkmen gas to South Asia. Construction on Tapi officially began in 2015, with Berdimuhamedow overseeing the groundbreaking ceremony. The project was highly publicized as a step toward economic independence and diversification. However, security concerns in Afghanistan and financial challenges delayed the pipeline's progress, leaving it incomplete by the end of his second term. 2. Lavish construction in Ashgabat. Berdimuhamedow spent billions of dollars on extravagant construction projects, including the Ashgabat Olympic Complex, which cost over $5 billion and hosted the 2017 Asian Indoor and Martial Arts Games. The new international airport in Ashgabat, designed in the shape of a falcon, costing $2.3 billion. The expansion of government buildings, luxury hotels, and white marble palaces, reinforcing Ashgabat's reputation as one of the most surreal capitals in the world. While these projects boosted his image, ordinary citizens saw little benefit as unemployment, inflation, and shortages of basic goods became more pronounced. Turkmenistan's geopolitical position, maintaining isolation. Despite his extravagant foreign visits and diplomatic engagements, Berdimuhamedow largely continued Turkmenistan's policy of isolationism, known as permanent neutrality. He maintained close ties with Russia and China, both of which were major trade partners. He sought closer relations with Gulf states, particularly Qatar and the UAE, for investment opportunities. His relationship with the West remained minimal, as international organizations criticized his human rights abuses and suppression of political freedoms. The 2017 presidential election, another stage victory. As his second term came to an end, Berdimuhamedow once again held an election with no legitimate opposition. The election, held on February 12, 2017, saw him win 97.69% of the vote, a predictable outcome in a country where the ruling regime controlled the entire electoral process. He now had a 7-year term, ensuring that he would remain in power until at least 2024. No international monitors were allowed to oversee the election, and media coverage was entirely state-controlled. By 2017, Berdimuhamedow had fully cemented his rule, eliminating all potential rivals, strengthening his personality cult, and making himself president for life. Despite grand infrastructure projects and international engagements, economic problems, growing discontent, and continued repression defined his second term. Part 7. The Road to Dynastic Rule, from absolute control to handing power to his son, 2007-2022. By 2017, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow had consolidated his grip on power, ensuring that no meaningful opposition existed, while his cult of personality reached new heights. Having already removed term limits, he was re-elected in 2017 in another rigged election that guaranteed him another 7 years in power. However, his third term was marked by deepening economic problems, increased repression, and a growing sense of uncertainty about Turkmenistan's future. Amid these challenges, Berdimuhamedow began laying the groundwork for the country's first dynastic succession, positioning his son, Serdar Berdimuhamedow, as his eventual successor. The 2017 presidential election, a staged victory. On February 12, 2017, Turkmenistan held its presidential election, which, as expected, was neither free nor fair. The official results were Berdimuhamedow won with 97.69% of the vote, the highest margin in his political career. 8 other candidates were permitted to run, but, as in previous elections, they posed no real challenge and were merely there to create the illusion of competition. Voter turnout was reported at 97%, though independent analysts questioned the legitimacy of these figures. Having now secured a 7-year term, Berdimuhamedow had full control over Turkmenistan's political system until at least 2024. The deepening of the cult of personality. During his third term, Berdimuhamedow's self-glorification reached unprecedented levels. His state-controlled media promoted an almost divine image of him, portraying him as a genius in politics, science, sports, and culture. Some of the most extreme examples of his cult of personality included 1. More books and official titles. Berdimuhamedow wrote dozens of books on topics ranging from horse breeding to healthcare, history, and leadership. His books became mandatory reading for government officials, students, and workers. He was officially referred to as Archidog, the protector. In public buildings, streets, and cities began incorporating the term into their names. 2. The golden statue of his dog. In November 2020, he unveiled a massive golden statue of a Central Asian shepherd dog, Alibi, in Ashgabat. This was part of a broader campaign to elevate the Alibi dog as a national symbol, reinforcing his image as a cultural leader. State TV broadcasted celebrations and parades dedicated to the dog breed, further demonstrating the bizarre nature of his personality cult. 3. Musical and sporting performances. Berdimuhamedow frequently appeared on state television, playing the guitar, singing patriotic songs, racing horses, and lifting weights. In 2018, he participated in a rap music video with his grandson, which was aired on national TV. He was filmed performing martial arts stunts, driving race cars, and teaching soldiers how to shoot guns, reinforcing his image as a multi-talented leader. These absurd public spectacles were designed to distract the population from the worsening economic situation and maintain the illusion of his invincibility. Economic decline and public hardship. Despite the extravagance of Ashgabat, Turkmenistan's economy continued to deteriorate, leading to increasing discontent among the population. The country, which relied heavily on natural gas exports, suffered from declining gas revenues due to falling global prices, economic mismanagement as billions were wasted on vanity projects, while essential sectors struggled with shortages, food shortages, with long lines forming at state-run stores for basic goods such as bread, flour, and cooking oil. A black market for currency, as the Turkmen manat's official exchange rate was artificially controlled, making real trade difficult. To control public dissatisfaction, the government restricted access to independent news sources, banned foreign journalists, and increased surveillance on citizens. Handling the COVID-19 pandemic, denial and suppression. When the COVID-19 pandemic began in early 2020, Turkmenistan was one of the few countries in the world that officially reported 0 cases. Instead of acknowledging the crisis, Berdimuhamedow's regime banned the word coronavirus from public discourse, preventing doctors from discussing it. Ordered citizens to wear masks but claimed it was to protect against dust storms, not a virus. Rejected offers of international medical aid, insisting that Turkmenistan had no need for outside help. Despite state propaganda denying the virus's presence, reports from exiled Turkmen journalists and activists suggested that hospitals were overwhelmed and many deaths were being covered up. Preparing for dynastic succession, the rise of Serdar Berdimuhamedow. As Turkmenistan faced increasing economic and political instability, Berdimuhamedow began grooming his son, Serdar Berdimuhamedow, to succeed him. In 2016, Serdar entered politics as a member of parliament. By 2019, he was promoted to Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. In 2021, he became deputy prime minister, making him one of the most powerful figures in government. This rapid series of promotions made it clear that Berdimuhamedow was planning a dynastic transition, ensuring that power would remain in his family. Stepping down, the first father-to-son succession in Central Asia. In February 2022, Berdimuhamedow made a sudden announcement that he would step down as president and that an early election would be held on March 12, 2022. His official reasoning was that younger leadership was needed, but it was widely understood that he was paving the way for his son to take over. As expected, the March 12, 2022 presidential election was completely rigged. Serdar Berdimuhamedow won with 73% of the vote in a race with no legitimate opposition. His father officially stepped down, but retained significant influence by remaining as chairman of the People's Council, ensuring he still controlled key state decisions. The transition cemented Turkmenistan as the first Central Asian country to establish a dynastic succession in modern times. While Serdar assumed the presidency, it was clear that Gurbanguly remained the true power behind the throne, pulling the strings from the background. By 2022, Berdimuhamedow had successfully engineered a political transition, ensuring that his family would retain control over Turkmenistan for the foreseeable future. His third term was marked by worsening economic hardships, bizarre propaganda displays, and a growing reliance on his son, Serdar, to carry on his legacy. Part 8, The Shadow Ruler, Post-Presidency and Continued Control, 2022-present. Although Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow officially stepped down as President of Turkmenistan on March 19, 2022, his influence over the country remained intact. Rather than completely relinquishing power, he orchestrated a dynastic transition, ensuring that his son, Serdar Berdimuhamedow, succeeded him while he himself retained control over key political institutions. While Serdar was technically the new head of state, Gurbanguly continued to operate as the true authority behind the scenes, holding the title of National Leader of the Turkmen people, Milli Leader. This marked the first instance of a dynastic succession in post-Soviet Central Asia, demonstrating Gurbanguly's strategic foresight in securing his family's long-term control over Turkmenistan. The 2022 presidential transition, a carefully staged handoff of power, won the 2022 presidential election, a predetermined outcome. The March 12, 2022 presidential election was nothing more than a political formality designed to provide a controlled transition from father to son. Serdar Berdimuhamedow, the president's son, won with 70% of the vote, a lower percentage than his father's usual results, but still an overwhelming and highly suspicious victory. None of the opposing candidates posed any real challenge, as all were handpicked by the regime. No independent international observers were allowed to monitor the election, and media coverage was entirely state-controlled. By March 19, 2022, Serdar Berdimuhamedow was sworn in as the new president of Turkmenistan, officially marking the end of Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow's 16-year presidency. However, this was far from a genuine power transfer. 2. The People's Council and the role of the national leader. Despite stepping down as president, Gurbanguly ensured that he remained the supreme authority in the country by assuming the newly created role of national leader of the Turkmen people, Milli Leader. This title was not merely symbolic. It was accompanied by formal political powers and privileges that allowed him to overrule the new president whenever necessary. On January 21, 2023, Serdar Berdimuhamedow officially appointed his father as chairman of the People's Council, a restructured upper legislative body that was granted new constitutional powers, making it the highest governing authority in the country. The People's Council, Halk Maslahati, was elevated above the presidency, effectively turning it into the true center of power in Turkmenistan. Under new constitutional amendments, the chairman of the People's Council, Gurbanguly, was given lifetime powers, allowing him to directly influence all aspects of governance, policy, and foreign affairs. By controlling this supreme organ of state authority, Gurbanguly ensured that he remained the de facto ruler of Turkmenistan, while his son Serdar served as a figurehead president. A father-son power-sharing arrangement, Although Serdar was officially the president, he was widely perceived as a puppet of his father. Unlike his father, Serdar lacked independent political experience. He had risen through government ranks solely due to family connections. Public charisma or personal authority, he was far less popular or recognizable than his father. Decision-making autonomy. Gurbanguly continued to make all major state decisions. Under this power-sharing arrangement, the elder Berdimuhamedow continued to dominate the following areas. 1. Domestic policy and government control. All key political, military, and security appointments were approved by Gurbanguly, ensuring his loyalists remained in control. State propaganda still revolved around him, with his books, speeches, and images continuing to dominate public spaces. No major policy decisions were made without his approval, demonstrating his continued grip over Turkmenistan's internal affairs. 2. Foreign policy and international engagement. Despite not being president, Gurbanguly continued to represent Turkmenistan on international visits, frequently meeting with foreign leaders and dignitaries. In November 2022, he traveled to Moscow for talks with Russian officials, signaling that he remained the key decision-maker in foreign relations. His first foreign visit as national leader was to the UAE in February 2023, reinforcing his personal role in Turkmenistan's global diplomacy. 3. Continued economic and strategic decisions. Energy policy remained under his control as he continued to oversee Turkmenistan's gas exports to China, Russia, and Iran. The massive infrastructure projects initiated under his presidency, including the Tapi gas pipeline, were still being managed by his personal inner circle. He maintained financial privileges, with state funds continuing to support his lavish lifestyle. Gurbanguly's influence on Turkmen society in his post-presidency. Despite technically retiring, Berdimuhamedow's influence over Turkmenistan's society, culture, and politics remained undiminished. His cult of personality persisted in several ways. 1. The creation of Arkadagh City. In December 2022, the Turkmen parliament renamed the capital of Ahal province as Arkadagh, a direct reference to Gurbanguly's title, meaning the protector. A massive new urban development project was launched with a focus on monuments, government buildings, and luxury residences honoring him. This move cemented his legacy, ensuring that even after his presidency, his name and image would remain central to Turkmenistan's identity. 2. Continued suppression of dissent. Even with Serdar as president, political repression continued, with strict censorship, arrests of dissidents, and heavy restrictions on civil liberties. Independent journalists, opposition activists, and critics of the regime remained under constant threat from the Ministry of National Security. The press, education system, and state-controlled organizations continued to promote Gurbanguly's ideological legacy, reinforcing his everlasting role in Turkmenistan's governance. 3. Legal immunity and special privileges. As national leader, he was granted full immunity from prosecution, extending this privilege to his family members as well. He retained a full security detail, government-funded travel benefits, and access to elite government resources. Although Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow formally stepped down as president in 2022, he remained the true power behind Turkmenistan's government, using the People's Council to maintain control while allowing his son, Serdar, to serve as a nominal figurehead. His continued dominance in political affairs, foreign relations, and state propaganda showed that his rule never truly ended. He had simply transitioned into a new role, ensuring his influence would continue indefinitely. Part 9. Legacy of a Dictator. The long-term impact of Berdimuhamedow's rule. Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow's rise, reign, and continued dominance over Turkmenistan have left a profound impact on the country's political system, economy, and society. Although he officially stepped down as president in 2022, his rule remains one of the most defining eras in Turkmenistan's modern history. His leadership was characterized by authoritarian control, a rigid cult of personality, economic mismanagement, and dynastic succession, setting the stage for a political future dominated by his family. 1. Political legacy, a closed and repressive regime. One of Berdimuhamedow's most enduring legacies is his reinforcement of Turkmenistan's autocratic governance. Instead of reforming the country into a more open and democratic state, he deepened authoritarianism, ensuring that no political opposition could challenge the ruling regime, with all alternative parties either banned, co-opted, or silenced. State surveillance and repression intensified, ensuring that dissenters were imprisoned, exiled, or disappeared. The media remained entirely state-controlled, making Turkmenistan one of the least free countries in the world in terms of press freedom and civil liberties. By engineering a dynastic transition, he also ensured that the political system would remain controlled by his family, making it nearly impossible for alternative leadership to emerge. Even after stepping down as president, he rewrote the constitution to maintain supreme power, effectively making the presidency a ceremonial role under his continued leadership as national leader. This restructuring of power has cemented Turkmenistan's status as a hereditary dictatorship, akin to North Korea's ruling Kim Dynasty. International perception of his rule. Berdimuhamedow's Turkmenistan has consistently been labeled as one of the most repressive regimes in the world. Human Rights Watch, Freedom House, Amnesty International. Among the lowest-ranked nations for press freedom, Reporters Without Borders consistently places Turkmenistan near North Korea and Eritrea, a dictatorship with no meaningful political participation, civil rights, or independent judiciary. Unlike Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, which have gradually opened their political systems, Turkmenistan has remained an isolated authoritarian state, largely cut off from international democratic norms. 2. Economic legacy. Wasted potential and mismanagement. Despite being rich in natural resources, Turkmenistan remains one of the most economically mismanaged countries in the post-Soviet world. Berdimuhamedow's policies resulted in a continued reliance on natural gas exports, making the economy vulnerable to price fluctuations and geopolitical pressures. A severe lack of economic diversification, as major sectors such as manufacturing, agriculture, and technology were neglected. Rampant corruption, with state resources funneled into extravagant projects instead of infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Grand projects versus everyday struggles. While Ashgabat was transformed into a futuristic city of white marble and golden monuments, the rest of the country suffered from rising poverty, food shortages, and unemployment. Berdimuhamedow spent billions of dollars on vanity projects, including luxury hotels, an Olympic village, and an artificial lake in the desert, all of which were rarely used or commercially unviable. Ordinary citizens experienced increasing hardship, with inflation, a collapsing currency, and food rationing becoming widespread. The black market exchange rate of the Turkmen manat skyrocketed, making imports unaffordable for many citizens. Despite his lavish spending, the country's economy remained heavily controlled and poorly managed, with most wealth concentrated in the hands of Berdimuhamedow and his inner circle. 3. Social and cultural impact. A nation built on a cult of personality. One of the most bizarre aspects of Berdimuhamedow's rule was his obsession with self-glorification, which transformed Turkmenistan into a nation built around his image. The cult of personality, how he crafted his own mythology. Much like his predecessor Saparmurat Niyazov, Turkmenbashi, Berdimuhamedow built a state-sponsored personality cult, including dozens of books attributed to him, covering topics from medicine to philosophy, horse breeding, and poetry. Mandatory school curriculum including his writings, forcing students to study his works as national wisdom. Giant golden statues and monuments glorifying him, including a golden statue of himself on horseback installed in Ashgabat, a golden statue of an Alabi dog unveiled as a symbol of his admiration for Turkmen heritage, orchestrated media events where he was shown riding horses and winning stage races, performing martial arts and lifting weights, singing and playing musical instruments, racing luxury cars and leading military drills. These stage performances reinforced his mythical status as a supreme ruler who excelled in all areas of life, a tactic reminiscent of authoritarian leaders such as Kim Jong-un in North Korea. The naming of Arkadagh City. In 2022, the Turkmen government renamed an entire city in his honor, officially calling it Arkadagh City after his self-proclaimed title, the Protector. This move cemented his place in the country's history, ensuring that his name would be enshrined for generations to come. 4. The future of Turkmenistan under his shadow. Although Serdar Berdimuhamedow is officially the president, it is clear that his father remains the real power behind the throne. The dynastic transition has solidified the Berdimuhamedow family's control over Turkmenistan, making it unlikely that political reforms will take place in the near future. The opposition will gain any real influence. Turkmenistan will open up to democratic governance. While many Turkmen citizens remain silent out of fear, dissatisfaction is growing due to ongoing economic struggles and rising poverty. Lack of employment opportunities and increased migration of young Turkmens seeking jobs abroad. Continued government repression, preventing political change or public dissent. At some point, Turkmenistan may face internal pressures for reform, but as long as the Berdimuhamedow family holds power, significant change remains unlikely. Final assessment: how will history remember Berdimuhamedow? Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow's rule will likely be remembered in three major ways. As an authoritarian dictator, he eliminated political opposition, controlled the media, and ruled with absolute authority. His government was ranked among the world's most repressive, alongside North Korea, Eritrea, and Syria. As a leader obsessed with his own image, his cult of personality rivaled that of Turkmenbashi, turning the presidency into a personal brand. His golden statues, staged media appearances, and self-promotion defined his leadership style. As the architect of Turkmenistan's first dynastic succession, his biggest political achievement was securing his family's grip on power, ensuring that his son would rule after him. The transition from father to son established a new precedent in Central Asia, one that may shape the region's politics for years to come. Although he is no longer president, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow remains the true ruler of Turkmenistan, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. His legacy of absolute control, economic mismanagement, and political repression ensures that his influence will endure long after his formal retirement.